Hi, I'm Jennifer Riggins. I'm one of the organizers of the ninth annual Agile Tour London. It's been quite an adventure being online the last couple of years, but it's been kind of great because despite, the horrible things in the world, but it's been kind of great because then we get to have discussions with all these people from anywhere in the world, and you're allowed more inclusion, more people can attend these events. And also we can give out more diversity tickets, which was super fun this year. Because when you're paying for an event and people to eat there, you have to balance everything out. But, for an online event, we can welcome more people. So welcome to everyone. This is the first real session. We had our fishbowl already. And welcome to our panelists. Today, we're talking about a theme that actually stolen straight from Andrea and her team at Container Solutions. We had our first psychological safety event in June. What is time anymore though? And they actually had done a workshop on psychological safety versus accountability. And actually there's a warm up today in Spatial Chat we had for the same topic at a fishbowl. And now we are having a discussion on this. I think it's very interesting because probably the people that are not making people feel psychologically safe are the ones that are saying that people must be accountable. And I don't think anyone's saying that you don't need to be. But I think definitely it's a hot topic and a thing people are concerned about. So for those that are joining us live, thank you very much for joining us. And I have some questions to start off with, but feel free to do in the chat. We'll do about 40 minutes of live discussion, and then we'll take a distinct purposeful pause to stop the recording. So if anyone has questions or wants to participate in a way that they don't feel comfortable doing on camera, we want to make sure they're safe. So thank you very much for everyone for joining. And I guess to start off, I think we should kind of define what we think those terms are. Just going around, Ben, you're on the top of my screen, so I'll let you introduce yourself first. And what do you think psychological safety even is? I always like to create an even balance where we all are talking about the same thing first. So thank you, Ben.
Okay, well, thank you, Jennifer. Ben Linders from the Netherlands. These days, mostly doing workshops, training, facilitating sessions, and also some coaching and mentoring. And if I look at the topic of psychological safety, the most important part for me is to have an atmosphere where people feel safe enough to speak up. If there's anything on their mind, there's anything that's bothering them, that they feel safe enough to talk about it, to raise it, to bring it up as early as possible in there. So in that sense, I think psychological safety is the means also to create a culture for continuous improvement, to create safety for people to try out some new stuff, try out ideas, speak up if anything is bothering them, speak up also if they see a way to improve, and get that culture of continuous improvement going.
Okay, so safe to speak up in pursuit of continuous improvement. So you can't have one without the other. Leanne, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what your definitions of these big terms are?
Sure. Hi everyone, my name's Leanne. I am a leadership development specialist. I have worked with some of the UK's biggest brands in kind of luxury fashion, retail, tech, on their leadership development strategy. And I'm also a qualified coach. I'm just completing my MSc in coaching psychology at the moment. So doing a lot of work for my dissertation around psychological safety. So that's why Jen kindly invited me. I think that Ben gave a great definition there of what psychological safety looks like in practice. And I guess what I would add to that is something that I think gets just kind of lost a little bit in the discussions around psychological safety, which is that before we can feel safe to like contribute and to feedback and to, challenge the status quo sometimes, like first we need to feel like we belong. So actually just creating teams and team structures where we feel like we belong as part of that group and that we're fully accepted, and that actually we don't have to conform, that we're kind of celebrated and accepted for our differences. So I think psychological safety really comes hand in hand with diversity and inclusion. I think you can't really separate them. So for me, that's what's really important about psychological safety. And then once you have that foundation, really being able to contribute, as Ben said, and being able to kind of really innovate and try new things and make mistakes without fear of kind of being excluded.
Absolutely, and feeling that sense of belonging. I'm finding that's a hot topic word now, instead of just inclusion, belonging. Andrea, you want to introduce yourself and also your definitions?
Sure. Thanks, Jen, for having me again. I'm really, really glad to be here again and talk about this subject. So I'm Andrea. My background is in clinical psychology and counseling psychology, and I've moved to HR and people management about 5-6 years ago, and organizations, and how do organizations deal with people problems, emotions, and all of that. So I bring a lot of input from my more clinical background into the organizations. And one key aspect is very much about how can we create an environment that makes sure people can thrive and grow. And I use, like Leanne said, her background is like a diversity and inclusion, how important that is for psychological safety. I think and I actually agree to Ben and what Leanne said, and probably Gitte, I think we're all quite aligned on these aspects, how important they are. But one thing that, for example, I work in the tech industry, and how important that growth mindset is, and how can you stimulate that within the industry we're working in, because that growth mindset is so important when it comes to development and facing the problems we're actually facing today. How can we overcome those challenges? It's essential for innovation. It's essential for growth mindset. And we all know that the brain needs to be feeling safe in order to create that mindset. So I use Kahneman a lot in references to system 1 and system 2 thinking, the flight and fight status of the brain, and the system 2 system where we use our cortex more in good decision making. And that is really key in creating that, and being able to have that psychological safety kind of just enables that brain to be free of fear, free of anger, and to actually think, and you actually use it to the full extent of what it can do. When it comes to accountability, they are yin and yang, right? You can't hold people account if you've not created an atmosphere where people feel it's okay to be accountable for something. So I think they go hand in hand, and if you don't have them, or they are not in the right balance, you create very toxic environments for people.
I think it comes down to, I hear a lot this movement towards talking about responsible tech instead of tech ethics, because ethics gets very bogged down in specific, maybe moral beliefs or even religions and things, which, well, you don't need any of those to be ethical. But this sense of responsibility, and I think that's part of accountability, and you want to feel like you're really part of something and you belong with something, but you can't really belong with it if you don't feel psychologically safe. Gitte, do you want to introduce yourself and close out this topic or open this topic really for us, please?
Yeah, so my name is Gitte Klitgaard. I have been an Agile coach for a very long time, and mostly worked with the people side of it. So in the beginning, I worked with processes, but found out that the really important thing is about people's. And since 2017, I've been working very actively with companies by introducing psychological safety, awareness of it, how does it work, what does it mean to us? And to me, I think some of the important thing is that you can, I like William Kahn's definition from 1990, which talks about how you can use yourself, how you can employ yourself without fear of negative consequence. So it's about being who you are, bringing up those things without fear. And that's also why it's hard, because fear is not logical always. And even though we have what looks from the outside like a safe environment, it could be that you experience something in a different place that will make this environment unsafe for you because you hear the same remark or the same thing. And one of the things I also work a lot with is helping people see that safety doesn't have to mean that you're comfortable all the time, because we actually learn best when we are a little bit outside our comfort zone, but that it is safe for us to make those mistakes, to learn, to take risks. So that's also something I work with people about, feeling safe enough to be uncomfortable. And when it comes to accountability, I often talk about there's 3 kinds of accountability. There's the good, there's the bad, there's the ugly. So the good is when we agree with someone, this is what I expect of you, this is the accountabilities you will have. We agree on that, and then we can hold people to account for that. The bad is, okay, you now have this role, you're accountable for this, go here. And the ugly is that sometimes we don't even tell people what they're accountable for, but we punish them if they don't live up to it. And I think that if we have good accountability, if we actually agree with people, it also, like Andrea said, it helps actually create a safe environment, because then people know what is expected of them. They don't have to guess if this is something or not. And yeah, and now I'm actually a manager. I've been a manager for 6 months. I still need to remember that I'm a manager, where most of our manager job is helping the individuals grow, because they are the best at the technical things. So what we help them with is we challenge them on things, we help them grow, and we help them see if they can, we can create a safe environment for them where they can grow in this way.
Something you said that I thought about, and it kind of harkens back to what Leanne was saying, and actually everyone, it's about be who you are,
Yeah.
and bring who you are to work. And it kind of sucks if you think about how you felt at maybe 13, and you were told all the time by the grown-ups that you'll find yourself, you're finding yourself, and then you'll find yourself and you can be yourself once you get out of school, because the school system is very rigid. But then you get to work, and I know that's not eloquent, but it really sucks that then you're told not to be yourself. So maybe university or other external education or your gap year abroad, things like that, may have taught you to be yourself, and then you're told you're not to be yourself, which kind of, even the school system kind of restricts that ability to find your true self and your optimal creativity and innovation and teamwork. So that, yeah, that's my thought, is that kind of sucks. Just a reminder to those that are joining us live, welcome, and you're welcome to add your comments, and if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll keep going through my questions, and of course, if our panelists have questions or follow-up for each other, I'm obviously losing my voice, so make it easier for me. One of the topics I thought about was one of our speakers, and actually an active community member and one of our volunteers too, Christina Thomas, was talking the other day during our lean coffee, and she described her job as agile coach and whatever else they want me to be. That I feel like is really usual, and we have a lot of agile coaches, either previously agile coaches or agile coaches in our conference this week. And it's kind of, agile coaching's been like this catch-all for everything, like your psychological safety, or people need improvement issues, or any idea that the company wants to improve on. It's like, okay, you're the agile coach, that's your job. Should it be that way? And I think we can't talk about psychological safety, or even talk about the tech industry at all, or any industry right now after the last year and a half we've had, without talking about its friend burnout. Frenemy. So how can an agile coach protect themselves? How can they, or any coach or any person that's in this kind of catch-all role, how can they learn to say no, or to create boundaries or restrictions? Anyone want to join first?
I think you have to. And I think, like, I call myself, I call myself agile coach and manager, but I've been calling myself agile coach for many years. And sometimes that's not what I do. So I've been a consultant, and I have weekly meetings with whoever is my sponsor to figure out what's the next most important thing for me to work on, because there's always something that's more important than other things. And I will also be driving that, as well as being in a collaboration with that. Because if what they want me to do is something that I don't believe is the right thing to do, then I also have the advantage of being a consultant, is I can say, if that's what you need, then it's not me that you need. But it's taken me almost 40 years to get to the point where I feel okay saying that, and where I realize that if I say no, something else will come up. Because I think a lot of people who work as agile coaches are consultants. And we can be like, okay, we need to make money. And if I say no, what if I don't make money? for me, what has helped is to have a savings. I always have, so I can live 6 months. Not when I started, I borrowed money from friends to eat. But after I started getting jobs, so that I know I can say no. And then I have a friend that I call, if I need to say no to something that I can't, I call him and ask for permission to say no. And even though I logically know that he doesn't decide over me, him giving me permission to say no helps.
Now, I will check, we have to take a privilege check for a second there, because those were wonderful things, and that takes a lot of strength, and you've built that career and you've worked hard, but there is definite privilege in having that ability to walk away from a job.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
Also, speaking from someone living in the UK, and this originally being obviously Agile Tour London, a very UK-based event, but we're definitely global now, but there's this whole IR35 now. There's an entire government regulation that kind of means people can't move around as much, or maybe people are Agile coaches on a permanent contract and things. But I think that is true, that what I really liked about that was just discussing and clarifying your goals.
Yeah.
A lot of times I think people think, well, they're there to coach everyone at all times, but especially when you're coaching multiple teams, you can get really burnt out. So I think that's really good. I just want to take a moment to read from the audience as well. Lorraine said, we also need to explain what psychological safety isn't and strike that balance. We see confusion where people think it means everything is sunshine and rainbows, and they shouldn't be pulled up if they do something wrong. Would love to hear the panelists have experience with this. And then, of course, financial security does add a lot to psychological safety. But I will also say, if you've been poor, you can't get over that worry about money. It's a habit by default. But Andrea, I think you wanted to talk.
Well, it's really interesting. Psychological safety doesn't actually, it's the opposite of sunshine and rainbows. Because I don't know if anybody read the book Chernobyl. I did, and it's a pretty tense book to read. But there they played rainbows and whatever it's called, unicorns. Everything was fine, but it wasn't. So it's actually the opposite. In psychological safety, you create the space for people to say, look, this is not good, man. We're going to make a big mistake here if we continue like this. So it's actually the opposite. It's space for people to raise these issues and concerns. So I think it's really important that, like Lorraine says, to really understand what it is actually that you're creating, either as a lead, as a coach, or whoever is in that group. And we must not mistake this with what we call trust, right? Interpersonal trust between two people in a room. For example, with your manager, or I trust him to look out for me when I'm not there, or trust him with my secret, whatever that is. That's different. This is not trust. This is creating an atmosphere where people feel like, look, I really worry about this, this nuclear thing we're building, and we're not using the right cement, so it's going to explode if this doesn't work right. That was the issue what happened in Chernobyl. People couldn't feel they could say that, and that obviously led to the biggest disaster in history. And another key thing, what we've noticed is that if people misunderstand this, they can kind of weaponize this against you as management or as leadership in your organization. And you have to be very wary about understanding where's that fine line. When does somebody just raise issues to be a bit bullyish, or to just kind of say, oh, I can say everything because we've created this atmosphere? And where do you set that line as a manager? Yeah, but this is actually taking it too far. Is someone actually behaving against the values you've set out in your organization? So it is definitely a fine line between those things, and they can go either way, right? That people really use it a bit to the fact that they can almost get away with things. You just feel like, wait a minute. And the opposite, where you get that idea. Yes, exactly. That's a really good example. Yeah, and that's those things, and that's where HR comes in place. I think just to kind of go into your question about burnout that you were talking about, Jenna and Gitte. You can't be the only person advocating an organization for this, and it's really clear what your mandate is as a consultant, as a role, because if you feel you're responsible for everything, that burnout will happen to you sooner than later. And it's good to have like good policies in an organization. What is allowed and what isn't? Where's the boundary? Where does the boundary set? And who do you report it to when people go over the boundary?
And follow up on it, I think. So like also like some people say, oh, I don't feel safe when you talk to me about these things. And then we have to talk about how do we create that safety, because if you are behaving badly, if you or if you're not living up to expectations, if we hired you to be a senior or something and it turns out that you are not performing, we have to have that discussion. It's not psychological safety, doesn't mean that everything is just happy. But we need to do this in a kind way where it's about people's actions and behaviors, not who they are, and where they know that this is expected of them as well. So we don't just come up to them and saying, you're not living up to this and this, and they kind of go, oh, I didn't know I had to. So you have to create that. But we do need to have an environment where we can talk to people about these things.
And I think it's really interesting, Amy Edmondson also defined this, this scale of mistakes, right? And you can make mistakes or fail or you know, try something out because it's an experiment you're trying to do. You want to try to find something out and you want to get data about that soon. And that could be a failure because you're testing a hypothesis. And she uses this scale, and it's very useful to look at that scale and to look at that, you know, that incident, for example, with a rapport with somebody in your team. Have they actually done that because they wanted to learn something about it? And therefore, actually, it's a celebration of that failure because you've learned something and you can move on. Or is it something that's really malign? Are they doing this to sabotage? Are they doing this to maliciously cause harm? And I think not every failure can be labeled the same. And it's really interesting to kind of see on an individual basis, is this malign behavior, or is this someone who's trying to learn and engage and figure out what's the next step?
I think that's really important. I think something that came up when you were talking there, and Andrea, about kind of the difference with toxic positivity and psychological safety, and like what's that fine line between those things. I think one of them, especially from a leadership perspective, and I think you and Gitte both said this, is kind of that positive regard. And I think when it comes to coaching and being either an agile coach or any kind of coach, positive regard and intent is so important, like believing that people are doing their best, or believing that that intent is there, and actually thinking and knowing that, you know, that person has all the answers in themselves is so like integral to achieving that kind of growth mindset that you were talking about earlier. And I think a lot of the time when as Lorraine was saying, that kind of sunshine and rainbows stuff comes out and people start to build that resentment, they lose that positive regard for each other, and that's where things really start to kind of slide into toxic positivity rather than actually you know, a safe environment where you can challenge the status quo.
So we do recommend vitamin D. It does help your well-being. We're not saying anti-sunshine and rainbows, just not BS. I think part of what we were talking about, especially when Andrea was talking about the scale of mistakes, I think that comes back into feedback loops and shorter feedback loops and back into continuous improvement. No, Ben?
Yeah, I think if you look in the continuous improvement, you want to create that atmosphere where it's safe for people to try something out and to do something, to learn from that. And I would even go that far to say that let's start from an assumption that you trust by default. That you trust by default that people are there to do the best job, to do good stuff in there. And that's something where I think we can work on our mindset. I think we had many cases where we saw something happening, where we saw people looking for the blame, where we saw people looking for, okay, why did this happen, and who can we blame to prevent this from happening again? And I think the learning from mistakes is much more important. The nice example I ever heard was from somebody driving a truck in a company and who made a big accident in the company, and then was told in by the manager to say, okay, you're probably going to fire me. Like, no, I just invested $100,000 in you, so I'm not going to fire you because I know you're not going to make this mistake again. I want to find a way to teach this to the other driver. prevent the other guy from making the same mistake. So you're my investment. I want to keep you in the company. So creating that atmosphere, creating that different thinking, and removing any barriers to safety in there, I think that's a key thing to do in organizations.
I think the real failure actually, Ben, is if you make a mistake and you don't learn from it.
Exactly.
That's
where you fail.
So other people can learn from it. That's the important thing. You don't keep mistakes secrets. You keep them verbal, because also sometimes mistakes are horrific, as we're seeing happening at companies. There's sexual harassment, there's sexual abuse. There's the head of one of the biggest companies in the world saying, yeah, transphobia is okay in our media. And now there's going to be a massive walkout at Netflix. So sometimes mistakes are bad and need to be reprimanded publicly, and people need to own it, and then you need to create policies to bring it up. It was interesting that you said trust by default, Ben, because then I think Andrea was making the nuance between trust you were saying is between two people, more than trust is not a definition of psychological safety. If you can explain that a bit more, that would be great.
Yeah, I think the trust by default usually starts between two people, because you basically have a smaller atmosphere in there. It's easier to use a concept like that with a smaller group. And it's starting from the assumption that the person that you're working with is trying to do a good job, just as you're trying to do a good job, and not trying to build in all kind of stuff to check if things are actually going well, if things are actually going valid. And what I've seen is if you start from that assumption 9 out of 10 times, and probably even 99 out of 100 times, this is true. If you're aligned on the goals, if you're aligned on the purpose why you are working together, then that trust is usually there, and it gets you going much quicker if you just have that assumption to start working on something together, instead of waiting for trust to build up and more or less waste time along the way.
Okay. Andrea, did you want to add anything to that, or no? Okay. Oh no, we're all losing our voices here today. Well, besides that, it's obviously cold and flu season. It's also the time of the Great Resignation, which is basically a lot of people are looking for jobs, and there's a lot of jobs in the market, and God bless it, because guess what? People are learning to work happier. Thank you, my co-working, for my prop. And they've, you know, a pandemic will put a lot of priorities in people's minds. But when there's always a risk when you move to a job, you're going to move to something worse. Do we have any tips for how to understand, or any red flags for around psychological safety and accountability during interview season? And when you're on interview, what should you be asking for those that are looking for jobs, or even also consultancy work, et cetera, partnerships with companies? What are some red flags, or what are some questions maybe people can ask to say, oh, maybe I don't want to work there, or yes, I want to work there? Andrea?
It's a really good question, actually, Jen. I've actually never really thought about this. One basic, simple could just ask, what's your strategy to create psychological safety for the people who work for you? And if they pause and they have actually no idea what it means, then you're kind of like, okay, this is not something they either, you know, aware of, and then is it maligned? Do they not want to do it, or are they just generally not aware of this such important, you know, aspect of our working life right now? Because it is a really important aspect of our working life. And maybe use that as a way to kind of educate people about that and how important it is, and what they as a company can do. I wouldn't say reject them per se because they don't have it. It is hard to implement these processes, and especially in bigger companies, it takes a while to create this throughout all levels, in all departments. So that would be my pretty straightforward.
I think asking about that, and then even like, how do you handle when people make mistakes? Or if you're in engineering, talk about how their bug culture is. Because if people say we have a 0 bug policy, you can talk about, for instance, how is this reflected in the daily work? Does this mean if we release a bug that it's a problem? Or Because for me, like every time I hear zero bug policy, I kind of have a little tingle and go like, okay, now I need to dive a little bit further into this, because if that means that we can't make mistakes, the only thing that happened is that people make mistakes. You get what you ask for, and you don't get the bugs, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. And even if that's kind of the technical part and the human relation part is very often reflected. So I would ask questions like this, for instance. I might also ask if they have a program for mental health, because I find that this is so strongly connected, that psychological safety is part of our mental health, that we do feel safe. But if I have a company that only talks about mental problems instead of mental health, could be like, yeah, we have a stress coach connected, and if people burn out, they talk to them, which is of course good, but it doesn't help us prevent. It doesn't help us help people be all that they can be, and work with their mental health. So some of those are red flags for me when I see that people is not an important thing in the company, they're just the ones doing the work.
Is there any risk that they're going to wrongly red flag you, like, oh, they care about mental health, maybe they're like, is there any risk, or is that just a really good way to cut that job out of your list of applications anyway?
It's a big risk. And for me, again, like, I am lucky. I have now worked so long that I have my savings and I can just say bye-bye. I would not go there. If you have, if you have a family, you need to find this job, you have mortgage, stuff like that. Of course, you can consider if this is something you want or not. But I would say if you are in a job position already and searching for a new, I might wait and look for a few more options.
Yeah, and so that's
I fully agree. I think life's too short to work for a toxic company. Don't do it.
but also that's a good use of your pillars for people that have that value, that cushioning. That's a good time to ask this question. Yeah, you've just gone through some interview processes as you're about to start a new job. Did you learn anything from it that we should know about?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. I think a lot of us probably might be a little bit nervous to ask such a direct question about psychological safety. Like, if you feel comfortable doing it, I think that's amazing. I think if you are a little bit kind of on the fence about asking something so direct, or maybe you feel like you don't know that much about the subject, so if they like bounce something back to you, you wouldn't be able to answer it. I think a great question to ask is, how do you measure success, as a company in the role? Because I think what you need to listen out for is people that measure success just by metrics. And sometimes people will just list off, getting 100% of this, doing this, which is fine. And you might ask, outside of those, what are the other kind of measures of success? And what I found in my kind of recent interviewing is that stumps a lot of people. And if a company doesn't have any other measures of success outside of like get 100% of this or 90% of this, then it's probably not a great company to work for. Because it means if you just don't hit those targets, and let's face it, at some point in your career, you're just not going to hit those targets because you're a human being, then you're not going to be successful. That always really puts me off. So what I have found, though, is that lots of companies are a lot more switched on. And actually, with the kind of mental health stuff and the offers that people put forward, and lots of amazing HR teams out there are really putting together like comprehensive packages to support people with their mental health. You also have to be very careful that those aren't kind of just sort of smoke and mirror devices. And I'm sure Andrea will know this from being in HR, is that a lot of times people are kind of putting together these mental health well-being packages, and they're really just like not worth the paper they're written on. Yeah, absolutely, Jen. Like, they're there to cover up a fundamental problem, which is that people aren't psychologically safe, and therefore they're burning out, and therefore they need that support. So I also think that's sometimes a little bit of a flag. So it's always worth digging into.
And just to be clear, it's normal that everyone is having challenges with mental health now. The statistic in the US, because I listen a lot in PR, so sorry, mine aren't as European relevant. They have more of a, oh my God, I'll lose my healthcare and die if I don't have a job relevant. But they've said the statistic is in any household, half of all households have an adult who's had depression or anxiety in the last year and a half. So it's the norm. So it needs to be well treated. As we wind down the recorded portion of this, I just really wanted to ask more about, for those within a job and those that maybe can't move jobs right now, how can they improve situations as an individual within a company that's maybe they're dealing with a toxic environment, maybe it's a toxic boss. I read once the statistic that 85, and you know, statistics can be made up sometimes, but it was 85% of HR professionals think people leave because of money. Only 12% of people leave because of money. People leave because of bad management. So how do you deal with, let's not go to the extremes of the illegal things like sexual abuse and harassment and even bullying, but like someone that's really passive aggressive on a Zoom call or cuts off people all the time in meetings. What are some techniques that people can do to support others and also themselves in maybe less than desirable instances?
I think that if you are brave enough, you can talk to them about it, but be very concrete. Like we had the meeting yesterday and I was trying to answer the question and then you said I had to stop. So being very concrete with that. But another thing, if you don't feel that's an option, if you don't feel that's a safe option, is to kind of find a buddy network, so to say. Find someone that you can talk to about these things. And also start building resilience, start working on your own mental health. For instance, one thing that I should do more of is meditation, to kind of look inside yourself. You can, once something happens that feels unsafe, you can take that deep breath and go inside yourself and just go like, before you react to it. So building that resilience and then getting a buddy, or even if it might even be your whole team. I've seen that in organizations as well.
One thing I would suggest doing is also work in organizations on the conditions where people can bring this up, creating a safe enough condition for people to discuss this kind of behavior, have this kind of behavior that's hindering them in teams. If you look back to Agile, the retrospective would be a place to do this, and you can create within that retrospective a small space of safety that would enable to discuss it. It's not going to solve all your safety problems, but it can help you at least to have a first discussion about this, for people to raise it and to talk about this and see, hey, this is something that we want to adjust. This is something that we want to work on.
I think all those things are great if that leadership is maybe doing this, they're unaware of it and you want to impact a change, a behavioral change in them. But if this is someone who is pretty like a high up person and you're a little bit at the bottom of the picking order, then it's really hard, and you can only raise those issues by going to someone in HR, someone you can trust, and talk about this, and that can be raised. But what you mainly see is that these people at one point start leaving the company, and this should be then done by either the people HR team to collect those exit data and flag that to senior leadership. There's unfortunately not much you can do as a person in that situation to really address those bosses that are like that, unfortunately, and people do leave. But if it's not in that situation, then bringing this up in these retrospectives, and if you can be brave enough, yes, definitely, right, if you have that, or maybe there's a team lead in between you and the boss, can you maybe address this to the team lead? Maybe that team lead can address it to the bigger boss. But yeah, it's unfortunately not a perfect world, and these people are there. And sometimes taking your breath and definitely stepping out of the room and what are my options again? Like, do I need to start looking for a different job because this is not worth it? This is setting your boundary. How much of this are you willing to accept in your life? And to say, like, you know what, I deserve better than you, and I'm gonna move away from this. That's a personal choice. That's only you can only make that decision for yourself.
You're on mute, Jem.
Thank you all so much for joining. I'm going to end the live portion of it so we can allow some safe space for our conference participants. But I have to say namaste and thank you so very much.